Since we started Dying to Tell You over a year ago, I've encountered many healthcare professionals in person and on social media that have listened to the podcast. Often, the story shared on the podcast sparks a memory of a story in their own career that has deeply affected them. As healthcare professionals, our patients are often our greatest teachers. The things we encounter as we care for patients and families from varied backgrounds helps us to expand our minds and breadth of experience, changing the way we practice and sometimes the way we live our lives. I wanted people to have the benefit of hearing some of those life-changing stories, to hear from these people that dedicate their lives to caring for the sick, especially those who care for people at the end of their lives. I wanted Dying to Tell You listeners to hear another perspective. So I've invited some friends to tell some tales about the things they've encountered that have changed their lives. This is Dying to Tell You, the Caring Perspective. Today we have with us the Dr. Andy Robinson. Andy has known about the podcast since before it started and has hooked us up with at least 3 people, maybe 4 people who've been on the podcast. So you're famous already because I shout you out every time you've given us patience to be on the podcast. But thank you for being here, Andy.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So maybe tell a little bit about yourself. We've worked together. I mean, you were there when I started or shortly after. So probably close to 12 years now. How did you get into palliative care? Where are you from? What are you doing?
Originally grew up in the South, moved to Colorado for residency and never looked back. I was a general internist for about 16 years and then decided about 12 years ago now to go back and do a year of additional training in palliative medicine, and then came back to Colorado and have been doing palliative medicine since then, about 12 years, like I said. Did home care originally and then did work in the hospital with you. That's where we met. And now I mostly work in a outpatient palliative care clinic along with a great team of nurses and social workers.
What made you want to do palliative care?
Long version, short version. Well, so the brief version is that part of it is that with general internal medicine, there was less and less new under the sun. I had seen most things, and so it was getting a little boring, to be honest. But even when I was in residency back in the 90s, I was somewhat inexplicably attracted to working with people who are really sick and facing the end of their lives. Back then, actually, that was when the HIV epidemic had begun to peak and there was no treatment. And so spent time with people who were living with and then dying of HIV disease. And also the oncology sort of patients I was attracted to. I didn't really want to do an oncology fellowship or an infectious disease fellowship. Palliative medicine wasn't an option back then. So it just sort of things freed up and I had the opportunity to do this and it worked out. And again, the same way that I came to Colorado and never looked back, I went and did palliative medicine and have never looked back. It was a good choice.
Yeah. Well, you're really good at it. I mean, anytime a patient is in the hospital who you've seen in the clinic, all they do is talk about how great you are. So, you're obviously very important to your patients. So, it seems like a good fit. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this is a platform for us to hear from healthcare workers about a story, that has changed your life or changed the way you practice. So tell me a story, Andy.
So, I'll tell you a story about John. So like I said, I had been in general internal medicine for 16 years and felt like I was pretty good at talking to patients and families. Early on in my fellowship, I was working in a large community-based hospital, and I and a social worker were charged with going to meet John, who was notorious among the staff there. He had, some of the details escape me, but if I remember correctly, he had advanced kidney cancer and was kind of at the end of treatment options, didn't have much less had been spending much more time in the hospital than out. And as is often the case with hospital teams, et cetera, they were getting frustrated with the fact that they didn't feel like they were able to communicate to John that there was not a whole lot left in terms of treatment, and that they didn't feel like the hospital was helping him, but no one could get through. And so this seasoned social worker and I we were sort of loaded for bear, and we were ready to go and expecting what we originally
loaded for bear
found, which was John. I don't remember how old he was. I imagine that in his chart, people had written appears older than stated age. Not a phrase I love, but that I still see. But he was haggard. He was thin. He was pale, lying in his bed with his very solicitous daughter next to him. And he was, in our initial conversation, like I said, I don't remember all the details, but he was either shut down, not engaging, angry, dismissive. And anger is not something that I rise to the bait to. And he didn't throw us much anger. It was just, we didn't really have a way to get there. And the social worker at that time, she just looked at him and said, John, we feel like that we're missing something here. What do you feel like that we need to know about you that we don't? And he got so, like, that's when the anger exploded. And he said, nobody knows a GD thing about me. I used to be the strongest guy in town. He was from rural Virginia. I think he was a farmer at one point. It's like, I hiked the Appalachian Trail twice before any of these young kids would do it. And now all these people see is just a dried up old piece of meat. No one really knows who I am. I think that those were his words, something like that. But I just remember the blast of anger and his daughter immediately trying to console him, which I think had kind of become her role in his care. And then the social worker, I don't remember what she said, but we just sat as we do and kind of listened. And she said something appropriately reflective, and he blew up again. And then he began to sob. Full. It still sticks in my brain because it was one of those overwhelming, like, guttural. Wails, the kind of thing that's like the cry of the soul, the cri de coeur. And then we begin, and then that just sort of opened the door. And then we had the conversation that we needed to have, or at least we began the conversation. I don't remember the rest of the story. I do remember that ultimately John went home with hospice care. And so what I learned from that was, as a general internist, I spent a lot of years getting to know people. I had relationships with patients, but I still only I knew about their families and that sort of stuff, but most of them either were healthy or they were living with chronic conditions, but they weren't at the end of their lives. And so most of my job at that point was, for lack of a better term, to treat them and street them, see them, get their problem done, talk some, but get them out of there. And with this gentleman, what I realized is that, especially when we're seeing people at the end of their lives, they have an entire story. Their life is this story. And I had always sort of approached medicine from a problem solving, know what I need to know, get what I need to get the job done and move on. And also I still have, although I'm better at it because of this work, the tendency to label someone, box them, just, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. And then how do I deal with that? And what that interview really, or that meeting really taught me about working with people is, I don't know their story. I am seeing them at the end of their lives. I've heard the river story before, and I am seeing just one little bit of the river that's been flowing for their whole life. I'm just dipping my toe in there. And it made me reflect on the fact that this gentleman had this whole life story, and he wanted people to know who he was, not who he is now. And so and the social worker was great at bringing that out. I learned a ton from her, and that has really informed the care ongoing, in that I try to, before I walk into the room with a patient, not have preconceived notions. Easier said than done for me. But also, especially if there's something difficult, what's the story? What's behind this? What's underneath this? When there's a difficult situation, and how do I elicit that story? And just the questions of, tell me about yourself, or that question about what do we need to know about you that we don't?
Right.
Has really allowed me to take better care of people, to allow them to feel heard, I think, and to allow them, to let them know that we're seeing them as a person, not as a cancer or a heart failure or whatever it happens to be, which is so common. And even that was kind of how I practiced, especially when I was busy. I was there to take care of your problem, not care of you.
Right. So much of the time people get defined by their illness, or whatever's going on right now. Yeah, man, that's really impactful. Obviously impactful for you, that you would remember that phrase. Tell me what we need to know about you that we don't know. Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's
something like that. I mean, you remember that almost 2 decades, past. Yeah. I say a lot, in the inpatient setting, especially because we're seeing these people for even shorter amount of time, right? Like, we don't know their story. We don't. And so, like, how can we come in and judge anger or, some crazy, seemingly crazy emotional reaction when all we know about them is just this one day, 2 days, maybe a week, 2 weeks at most. And, we can't judge them. We can't label them. And we would probably do well to try to learn a little bit more about who they are. Man, what a powerful story.
The other thing I learned from that, and I think we talked about this in the debrief, I don't remember, but was, I think it is very common in all of us, but especially in non-palliative medicine, to underdiagnose, to underrecognize, and to undertreat grief. And when we see anger as a manifestation of grief, I mean, not everything is grief, but for him, his anger was his grief at the loss of who he was, and the person that he wanted to be. And nobody recognizing that reminded him of that loss. And recognizing grief is so powerful, and sometimes naming it is powerful, or just discussing it. I think for you and I, it's just become rote. Sounds like you've lost a lot. Sounds like your cancer has taken a lot from you. Those sorts of things, and just acknowledging that. And that, I think some of the best physicians that I've worked with, both in and out of palliative medicine, and social workers and nurses and chaplains, I think it comes naturally to you as a chaplain, more than it does to people who are more medically oriented, to recognize and respond to grief. And that kind of training has been invaluable. And now it kind of becomes second nature. Oh, is this emotion grief? It just kind of clicks that way. And I think that was a big turning point. This encounter was a big turning point in recognizing the impact of grief at the losses that people who are living with serious illness suffer. Yeah,
so true. You were talking about the kind of the story of his life, the river of his life, that has been flowing for so long. One of our social workers talks a lot about the narrative of somebody's life, and how these people are going along and they are a story, right? Everybody's a story, and they have this imagined ending, or kind of an assumed ending, maybe. And when somebody gets a serious illness that they didn't think they were going to get, or is a surprise to them, or even if they thought maybe that would happen, it's something new. And incorporating this new thing into their story is really important. It's an important step in being able to kind of come to terms with it. And as you were talking about, like, this man saying, you don't know me. I am this, I am this strong man. I am this hiker, but he's not anymore. And being able to call out that loss, I think for anybody, starts the process maybe of coming to acceptance and being able to write this new thing into the story, right? Because he's not that anymore. He was that. And how do you make sense of that loss of what he was and the becoming of what he is now? And where do those two things meet? And what does that mean for him? That all is really important as somebody's coming to the end of their life and trying to wrap things up and come to acceptance of it. And being able to call that out for them and start that process is so important. Really, this highlights the importance of an interdisciplinary team in this kind of work. I mean, I think it's important for all of medicine. I think everybody should walk around with a social worker, but
and a chaplain.
And a chaplain and a chaplain. But yeah, wow. Good story. Good stuff. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What else? Anything else?
I don't think so. I think that those were the lessons that I learned from that and the things that really became ingrained in me in that then I've continued hopefully to improve on how I think about people to become putting them less in a box, certainly not thinking of them as a diagnosis, and trying to figure out what part of their story is important for us to know.
Yeah. I love this. This, especially when I'm talking with people that I know, you, Jeff, Laura. I know you all as you are now, or as you were 12 years ago, but I see you all as so excellent. I mean, you're very good at your job. All of you are. And it's cool for me to see that you learned, like, that there were moments in time where you thought, oh, this is something I need to incorporate this into my practice, and then see how it has become second nature for you. You're excellent at doing this. So yeah, it's really neat for me to see the humility of learning from you guys. Really cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Dying to Tell You the Caring Perspective. Andy, you're the best.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for spreading the message of learning more about death and dying before we get there.
Yeah, it's so important. And thanks for sending us all your patients.
I got more.
No, please send them my way. Thank you to Andy for getting this podcast started by connecting us to Aaron from episode 1. And thank you for your continued support. It's so great to know that after all these years of practice as a primary care physician and as a palliative care physician, the stories of your patients still touch your heart and bring tears to your eyes. Thank you for listening to The Caring Perspective. Season 3 of Dying to Tell You is well underway. We have several excellent interviews of people living with serious illness already recorded, but we're always looking for more. So if you or a loved one is living with a life-limiting illness, you have a story to tell. Let's tell that story together. Go to our website, dttypodcast.com, and click the Share Your Story link to get started. Remember, you can watch all episodes of The Caring Perspective on YouTube, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have more guests coming each week with thoughtful stories of hope and learning at the end of life. Thanks again for listening. This is Dying to Tell You, The Caring Perspective.